telling you all about this is because we talk about a word in the classroom called schema. And I have a packet here of my PowerPoint. I just couldn't give it to you before because it would have given you the answer. So I just wanted to make sure that I sort of tested your background knowledge or your schema. So a schema is a theory based on the idea that humans' memories are organized almost like filing cabinets. You have, if you don't mind, I'm going to pass some to be passed back. Do you mind passing those up for me? Thank you. Thank you. Now, what your schema is it's a theory that it's based on the idea that the human memory is composed of pockets that hold specific information. So when learning occurs, what you do is you place it where it belongs. When we talk about this in the classroom, we sort of say, well, we talk about schema, we refer to it as our background knowledge or what we already know, but I often refer to it as sort of a system of filing cabinets in your mind. And so if you're reading about a rocking chair, you're going to file the information you've learned about a rocking chair with things you know about chairs. And then you commit it to memory. And that's where it's important to reading. And if you're reading about nuclear fusion, but you don't know a great deal about it, you're going to struggle to commit this to memory. Kind of like with the first sentence of bagpipes. If you weren't familiar with bagpipes, it was a little bit harder to understand. It's almost like the sentence didn't make any sense. So in the classroom, we refer to schema as our background knowledge because it's what we already know. We already all know a lot about baseball, so we all knew the baseball one right away. Someone who doesn't know a lot about baseball may have been confused and thought a large number, 37, smashed something over the fence. But if you're familiar with the game, you could associate it with a player who was number 37. So in the classroom, we talk about schema because it's important to always think about what you already know so you can connect what you're reading to that information. And I always sort of kind of get the kids to tell me what they already know about things. We always try to activate our prior knowledge first, or our background knowledge. To make inferences, we need to access our background knowledge. So it's important that students know what it is as well, so it's really a term we use often. So in the classroom, we use a reading workshop. And the reading workshop is sort of a method or a way to schedule your teaching for reading. We do it with writing as well, and we'll look more at that when we see our anchor charts. So in a reading workshop, the first 15 to 20 minutes is usually a mini lesson. And that's where I try to provide a focus lesson demonstrating a specific skill. So really teaching a reading skill. Not so much teaching a text, but the actual skill that the students can use with a text. Then for about 35 to 40 minutes, it's independent practice. And what that means is the students are reading a text and practice the skill that they've learned in the mini lesson. And what I often do during this time is I confer with students one-on-one or I pull small groups. But this time is really dedicated for the students to be reading and reading independently. To get better at reading, you need to be reading. And what we're doing throughout this time and throughout the school year is sort of building the stamina for the length of time that we can be reading independently and practicing those skills and strategies that we've learned. And then at the end, for about 10 to 15 minutes, we come back together for a group share where the students either revisit the skill that they've learned. For example, recently we learned how to infer the meaning of unknown words. So when we come back together, the students will sort of share the words that they found and how they inferred the meaning. Having that group share and that social aspect of it really helps to sort of solidify the learning as well. Thank you. And oftentimes, too, it will either be in a large group or with reading partners. Everyone has reading partners. Hello. Thank you for coming. So that's sort of the setup of a reading workshop, and that is how we do reading every day. Sort of set up that way with a mini lesson, then the independent practice, and then we come back together as a group share. So there are certain skills that are studied in a reading workshop. One of the things that we do pretty much during every mini lesson we make is we make anchor charts. Can anyone help me explain why we call them anchor charts? Carly, can you tell us why we call them anchor charts?
Because it holds all of our ideas, and an anchor on a boat holds the boat.
Exactly. Very good. Thank you. So anchor charts hold our thinking, so we can always refer back to them in the classroom. These are some examples of anchor charts, and we call them anchor charts because just like a boat anchors, an anchor holds a boat, these charts hold our ideas. This one here is a mini lesson on when meaning breaks down. We have to sort of recognize when it breaks down and then strategies to use for us to bring our understanding back to the text. This one here is from some of our character studies. This one is making inferences. We use a formula called BK plus TC equals I. Can anyone help me explain what that is? John?
Background knowledge plus next clue equals I.
What's I? Who else can help us? Natalie? I'm sorry, Haley. Inference. Very good. Thank you. So your background knowledge is what we talked about at the beginning, the schema, what you already know, combined with your text clues, and then you make an inference. Here's our mini anchor chart from a mini lesson on legends, doing a genre study. We also make anchor charts in writing workshops as well, so there's an anchor chart for writing. How to talk to our reading partners, non-fiction text features, and over here is what good readers do, and the thoughts written on the anchor charts are the students, they aren't mine. So it holds their thinking. One of the other skills that we do in reading is predicting, asking the students to sort of think of what they think is going to happen next. It can happen at the beginning of the book, it can happen in the middle of the book. Each time while we're reading, I ask the students to make predictions. Their predictions can always change, and they often do change based on the further they read into the text. When we monitor our inner conversation, if you've ever heard any of your children talk about listening to your inner conversation, when we read, we sort of hear, we hear our thinking, so it's thinking about your thinking. Listening to what the voice in your head is telling you. A lot of times I'll use an example like as I'm reading, I'm looking at text and then I think, it's raining. Am I going to have soccer practice today? And that's recognizing your inner conversation is distracted. You're really not reading the text anymore, so it's sort of recognizing when we need to bring our thoughts back to the text and understand what we're reading. And really, listening to our inner conversation ties into every other skill we have to use, so it's something we learn pretty early in the year. And that's also tied into our fix-up strategies. That's when meaning breaks down. You have to really be listening closely to your inner conversation to know when your meaning's breaking down, so then you can actually use a fix-up strategy to fix that and bring your understanding back to the text. We do a lot of questioning. There are literal questions and inferential questions. Literal questions we often refer to as questions that are right there, and I tell the students that because you can usually put your finger right there on the answer. What color was the girl's shirt? Is the character tall or short? It's answers that the text actually really tells you. Inferential thinking is when we have to use our background knowledge with those text clues. We can't answer it with just the text. We need to really put our own thinking into it as well. And again, that brings us back to the bagpipes, right? Bringing your own thinking into the text is really very important. So building that background knowledge before we start reading is so important. Visualizing. Visualizing when we're reading is sort of making a picture in our minds. Picturing the text, a lot of times if I'm using a read aloud in one of the mini lessons, I ask the students to visualize what's happening, making that picture in their minds. Sometimes we call it a movie in our minds as well. We use the same strategies in a writing workshop. Connecting. Any connections to a text are great if you can connect it to yourself, something you find relatable. A lot of times students make connections, things that are similar in two different texts that they've read, or connection to the world. If the book is about, recently we've read a book about a boy climbing a mountain, and students can make connections of either they've climbed a mountain, they know someone who climbed a mountain, they've seen a show of someone climbing a mountain. So any connections really kind of help us hold that information, really commit it to memory. And that's, again, that background knowledge piece is very important. And inferring is a lot of times in the text the author leaves out answers or doesn't explicitly tell you everything, and that's where you make an inference. You sort of use those text clues, again, your background knowledge to fill in the blanks. A lot of times an example could be if a character is sad, the author may not come out and say the character is sad. It may sort of give you clues of, oh, she was sighing sorrowfully. So we have to really kind of connect, oh, when someone sighs, oh, they might be upset. So we have to sort of know that. The author's not just going to tell us that the character is sad. And independent reading. And independent reading is a lot of work. Sometimes it may seem like, oh, we're just reading, but reading is a lot of work. It's sort of combining many of these together. When you're reading independently, you're predicting, you're questioning, you're always listening to your inner conversation, you're visualizing, making those connections, and oftentimes inferring. So even though it's not something we always necessarily see on the outside, it's happening while that independent reading is taking place, and so that's why we really try to practice those skills one by one, so when we're reading, we can use them all together. Book clubs. So we actually just started book clubs last week, and that's sort of part of our curriculum calendar for 3rd grade. And in the book clubs, the students have different roles. The whole purpose of book clubs is to get students to talk about text meaningfully, and really sort of dig deep into the text and find deeper meaning than just what's on the surface. So one of the jobs is a discussion director, and their job is to think of good questions while reading to get the discussion started. When the group meets, and they keep it moving throughout the meeting, so if the conversation dies down, it's sort of a clue to them, oh, I'll ask my next question. Typically I ask that they think of 3 or 4 questions, and I often ask if they should be more inferential than literal. I'll sit with the book clubs and listen to their conversations and read their questions, and then I'll kind of ask them, is that a literal question or inferential? Or if it's inferential, I'll really sort of point it out like, that's an excellent question. And if you sit with the book club and notice, the conversations are stronger and they last longer if it's an inferential question than a literal question. The connector. This person makes connections in the text to use things to the text to things in the real world. They also may connect ideas to other books. Oftentimes they use phrases like, this makes me think of, or this reminds me of. And that, again, can sort of trigger other connections amongst the other members in the group. So even though you're the connector, it doesn't mean that that other students can't make connections as well. Someone is the illustrator, and again, this is sort of that visualizing and putting it on paper. The illustrator provides a drawing of the text to summarize the main ideas about the text, or part that they really thought was important that needs to be revisited in their discussion. The summarizer gives the group a statement about what was read in the text. They give highlights of the main ideas and supporting details in the text. So they sort of remind everyone about what they read during this part of their book. And the word wizard. And they know any puzzling, interesting, or unfamiliar words found in the text. They may look these words up in a dictionary and provide meaning for discussion with the meeting. Since we learned how to infer the meaning of unknown words, we can now, as a group, infer those meanings too. Another task we practice in the classroom is choosing just right books. And we have book bags, which I've left out on the table that you can explore after if you'd like. And readers really get the most out of books when their books are sort of a just right fit. It's really what they should be reading. And here are just some suggestions of what you can do to choose a just right book. Any topic that's interesting to you is usually just right. If you're interested in something, you're motivated to read it. So finding topics that interest you is really very important when choosing books. If you have an author that you've read books by before and you sort of like their style, that's also something to continue to try, reading books by that author. If you like a certain genre, if you know that you like nonfiction books and you love to learn about frogs, then you can stick with reading about frogs. Maybe you can even find fiction texts about frogs too if you like frogs that much. So sort of sticking with topics that you like and genres that you like. Maybe you like science fiction, and so science fiction books would be a good fit for you. And then a favorite series. A lot of times books that are in a series, if you like one, you like them all. So that's sort of a nice thing to stick with. And then also in the classroom we practice the 5-finger test. And what the 5-finger test is, you choose a book and it can fit all of these categories. It can be a topic you like, an author you like, a genre you like, or a series you like, and you read the first page. And this is really when the students are on their own picking books, and I tell them every word that gives you trouble, put up a finger. If they get to 5, I make the suggestion that maybe you should choose a different book and come back to this one after. It doesn't mean you can't ever read the book. It doesn't even mean you can't read the book right now, but it's just a suggestion in choosing those books that sort of fit you just right. And some things that can be done at home to support readers at home is talking about what was read helps. Sometimes talking about those ideas, and I found in the book clubs, talking about ideas, sometimes misunderstandings come up, and the group members are able to clarify those misunderstandings. So often talking about what you've read is very important, and it helps us to better understand. Trips to the library are a way to access numerous books, so sort of if you find a series you like or you find an author you like, they should be available at the library. And reading is reading. So jokes, poems, comics, they're all texts and they're all fun. Now comic books, we have read some Calvin and Hobbes comics, and actually most of the time comic books to understand or jokes to understand, you have to infer. They don't really tell you this is funny because you sort of just laugh because you thought it was funny. So with comics, it's really actually, you're inferring a lot when you're reading them, even though it seems like just fun reading. And no one's ever too old to be read to, so you could share an article from a newspaper your child might like, take turns reading out of a chapter book, and make predictions of what's going to happen in the text before it's read, and have fun, because reading is fun. There's the library. And that's it for my PowerPoint presentation, but what I'd like to invite you to do is you can certainly explore your book bags, and also the children's reading binders that are out. The anchor charts are up. You're welcome to read those, and I have more anchor charts over here sort of displayed. Some of them are in different shapes, like when we inferred the meaning of unknown words, we sort of had to hold it sideways, so you'll see some of them are like that, but then our book club norms, and again, this is all the students thinking, so that's why some of them are just quick. They're sort of written right away for the kids to just get their ideas out, and I can sort of put them on the chart. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any, and I thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Then feel free, book bags are on the back table, reading binders. Boys and girls, you can get your reading binders and share them with your families if you'd like.